You're listening to the Future Tech Health Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Until I reached age 40, I never realized the obvious, that we all have medical issues, or we at least have a family member or close relation that had, has, or will have them in the future. Medicine and biological systems are the final frontier. Until we've conquered death, figured out how life began, cured cancer, and understood our purpose in the universe, there's a heck of a lot to talk about when it comes to our health. Future Tech Health means I'll be covering futuristic topics that are actually already in clinical trials, or even starting to appear on shelves or by prescription, or available for your own use. We dive deep into stem cells, CRISPR-Cas9, the science of sleep, epigenetics, medical testing, cancer, ketogenic diets, stem cells, aging, regenerative medicine, and more. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a serious medical problem. Remember, however, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and share it with friends. Thank you.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech and Future Tech Health podcast. And I have Dr. Thaddeus Gala. He's the founder and medical director of Complete Care Health Centers in Southern Oregon. The website is drthadgala.com, Dr. Thad Gala. He performs educational lectures on nutrition, weight loss, and diabetic management in the clinic and at various locations around the country. And he has nationally published research and has been the keynote speaker at schools and teaching facilities, speaking to audiences of 1,000 people or more. He's the author of a couple publications, including The Secret to Defy Disease and Decay and the Cookbook to Defy Disease and Decay. So Thaddeus or Dr. Gala, thanks for coming. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, this is great. Looking forward to diving into some fun stuff today.
Yeah, so I've asked a lot of people, I've interviewed this. When people are interested in health, unfortunately, usually it means that either themselves or some family member or someone they know has had a significant health problem. So, if you don't mind sharing, what prompted you to get into the health sphere?
Yeah, great question. So my origin story goes back to when I was about 10 years old, and there's pictures of me with a crowbar remodeling the kitchen with my dad to get ready for my mom's wheelchair. And all the doctors said the same thing. Sorry, there's not much that can be done. Whatever your mom has, it's progressive. She'll be spending the rest of her life in a wheelchair. Have a nice life. And she went to doctor, and unfortunately couldn't find any answers. And since then, I've spent my entire career, my entire life path, and my mission has been to help people naturally reverse chronic disease without the use of drugs or surgery, so they can live a high, fulfilled, quality life. As a result of that, now I think, as you mentioned, I'm the CEO and I founder of 4 different integrative medical clinics. I oversee about 42,000 patient interactions a year. And for me personally, aside from running those businesses, I try to stay abreast on not only the emerging research, but also I work with a select handful of clients that have some kind of Western chronic health issue that they want to get rid of, whether it's Parkinsons, diabetes, sleep apnea, fibromyalgia, arthritis, Alzheimer's, whatever it is they want to get rid of or slow down or stop. They come to me, and so I work with a handful of clients at any given time, somewhat selectively in that. So I've gone down the natural route, and just to kind of bookend that story, now my mom is in her 70s. She's our lead health coach. She just started running 5K races a couple of years ago. And now she has to find younger and younger friends, which to me is pretty darn good, given that she was told she'd be in a wheelchair the rest of her life, and almost lost her job, was on full disability, couldn't use her hands, couldn't even write. She had to wear braces. Like I said, she almost lost her job. The only reason she was able to keep her job was other teachers at the school district that she taught at, where they kind of changed the ruling. And they allowed kind of a loophole to where they allowed other teachers to donate their sick time to my mom, so she wouldn't lose her job while she was trying to go through disability and so forth. So yeah, health is pretty near and dear to my heart, and I've seen obviously Western medicine has its place, and it's certainly not in prevention or wellness or corrective care. It's in surgeries and life-saving emergent type care. But unfortunately, we often lump everything into that, and that's we run into a lot of problems with that mindset.
That's true. So, I mean, health is very expansive. What areas of health and wellness have you decided to focus on?
Well, right now I'm doing my PhD on reversing Parkinson's, largely because, well, a couple of reasons. I started off doing mostly fibromyalgia and chronic pain reversal, and then it kind of just ballooned into other things because a lot of the same lifestyle behaviors and things I was doing, working with people on, health techniques and so forth, which I'm happy to dive into some of that today if you feel prudent or helpful for your listeners. And the more that we dove into that, the more I realized that there was the sequelae or the secondary health issues started to resolve as well. So when we started realizing that, I went back and looked at the research and found the correlation. And so the reason I picked Parkinson's for my PhD was that I feel like it's kind of the forgotten neurological disorder. Alzheimer's gets a lot of attention, dementia gets a lot of attention, and we get such great results with Parkinson's. I was even just talking with a gal last week. She's off of all of her carbidopa, levodopa. Her voice is getting stronger again. I'm not sure how much familiar you are with Parkinson's, but one of the leading causes of death with Parkinson's is people either choking on food or suffocating as they lose their mobility with their vocal cords, et cetera. So she's able to talk better. She's able to chew. She's able to swallow better. She can function. Her and her husband now have value in their future together. So we've had such great results. I've just dove into that, even though there's a tremendous amount of crossover into Alzheimer's and just about every other chronic health issue that people are suffering with.
Well, let's start with Parkinson's. So the fact that you're getting a PhD in how to reverse it, the non-traditional way or the non-standard of care way, is amazing that you even can get a PhD in such a thing, and you wouldn't be discouraged or simply disallowed from doing so. But what are the methods by which you're able to help people with Parkinson's?
So most people are familiar with the concept of subclinical inflammation. But unfortunately, that's kind of where most people's understanding stops. And just for those people that maybe this is their first exposure to it, if you look into pretty much any medical journal today, you'll find that almost every article that's talking about a patient population or a disease, it'll almost always start with a line in the first paragraph or so along the lines of, well, now that it's well understood that inflammation is the driver of X disease, just fill in the blank there, we now go on to, and then they talk about their study. So by inflammation, I'm not talking about the inflammation that you experience when you sprain your ankle or you get a cut on your hand. That's acute inflammation. What I'm talking about is this low-grade, long-term, insulting type injurious stimuli, kind of like smoking, right? Smoking doesn't give you lung cancer overnight, but if you smoke a pack of cigarettes every day, that low-grade kind of constant assault that's on the background, it's just this kind of white noise in the background that at first you don't think is a problem, but it builds up and the cause and effect is so far delayed. In the case of smoking and lung cancer, looking at 15 to 30 years to maybe never getting lung cancer. And it took us decades before we all got on that bandwagon and realized that smoking wasn't good for us. And so the inflammation is the same thing. So to answer the first part of your question, what we do is we look at people on an individual basis and we identify about 12 different areas that are the biggest sources of inflammation. And then we go through that person's life and we find out how and what we need to do to not only reduce the source of causative inflammation in their life, but then we look at what can we do to then maximize anti-inflammatory things in their life. And it's one of those things that most people, they look at it and they think, oh, well, I'm already pretty healthy. I don't have inflammation. And I would say, well, first off, if you take any prescription medications and it's not for a short-term infection, then you have inflammation. And really, that's probably the simplest way to look at it. Or if you're even just 10 to 20 pounds or more overweight, you have inflammation. If you've ever been diagnosed with a Western chronic disease, you have inflammation. Bottom line is everybody has inflammation, and it just depends on how high or how low your inflammation is and how important it is to you to live a high quality long-term life with reducing the risk of chronic disease. And if that's important to you, then really understanding this inflammation and going through those different levels in your life and taking stock and working with someone that can really, kind of see around corners for you is really, if you want to optimize it, That's the route that I typically suggest people go.
Okay, so what is inflammation if you look at it on a physiological level, and how does it
Right.
arise?
So inflammation is the body's natural response to something that is considered an injurious type stimulus. So just using the smoking example, since we already kind of opened up the door on that one, if you smoke, it causes this low-grade irritation to your lungs and your airways, and it doesn't necessarily cause a problem at first. I mean, it is unhealthy, but your body is very resilient, so it can fight that off. If you just smoke maybe, let's say, 3 cigarettes today, and that's the first and last and only time you'll ever smoke cigarettes, your body will be able to clean itself up after that. But what happens is, so that's an injurious stimuli, but your body then would normally respond to that. It would heal the area, and then it would turn off, and you would stop smoking. But what happens is, if you keep smoking, your body then keeps seeing this as an injurious stimuli, and your body is very resilient in that it likes to protect itself. So what happens is then it starts to respond to this injurious stimuli and these chemicals that are in cigarette smoke, just for instance, and that's when cells start becoming cancerous. Just for a simplistic illustration, what happens is almost like kind of when you walk barefoot, you build calluses on your feet, or if you use your hands a lot, if you're a farmer or work outside or construction, you're going to build up calluses on your hands, right? That's your body's natural defense to toughening up the area and protecting it from the insult. But what happens is when you smoke too much for too long, that low grade, instead of you building, let's say maybe like that callus in your lungs, becomes cancer. And that's the problem. So if you do things in your life, which there's literally infinite things you can do that will cause inflammation, and we can dive into a few of those if you want. But what happens is then when you do those things in your life, then your body builds up a callus to that. So, and that's where genetics comes in. So for instance, if you have the genetic predisposition for, let's say, prostate cancer or heart disease, well, if you do things in your life or are exposed to things in your life that causes your body to elevate its inflammation, which is typically a natural healing response, but the cause that's causing it, to the inflammation to go up, doesn't get turned off, then what happens is then those genetics get activated. So it's kind of like your whole body is exposed to this injurious stimuli. So it's essentially kind of an active scar tissue in response to that. So for you, if you have high inflammation, you may develop prostate cancer or heart disease. For women, they have a high likelihood of developing breast cancer. For a lot of people, they'll develop Parkinsons or Alzheimer's, and that's just the genetic weak link. So when we look at all of these disease processes or aging diseases, and we look at them individually, we're really missing the boat, because pathologically speaking, they're one and the same when you look at the actual chemical breakdown of what's going on at a chemical level. And that's probably one of the biggest banes of Western medicine. They compartmentalize things so much, which I understand it's important to have experts and so forth, but we compartmentalize things so much that, I think it'd be good for most Western doctors to go back and learn the song, the knee bone's connected to the shin bone and so forth, because we've just completely turned into specialists. Why? Because it pays more. I could get into the whole politics of how it's broken and why our system actually incentivizes sick care and it incentivizes doctors to become more specialized because they get paid more, et cetera, as opposed to wellness providers. But that actually accelerates and feeds forward this mantra, because then you have this endocrinologist that's maybe focused just on the thyroid or something, and that's their specialty niche, even though they're an endocrinologist, and they're not that versed on other health issues. And so they're not putting all the systems together, or they refer you out, and then you get on this jungle gym kind of effect, and it just turns into a mess, and it's so much more complicated than it needs to be.
So I would guess most of the people that you see, they have some sort of persistent inflammation caused by diet or other stresses, and that manifests itself in many things, but one of them is Parkinson's, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, diet's probably one of the biggest ones. For most of our patients, I usually use kind of the 80-20 rule. We can get them 80% there if we focus 80% of our efforts on correcting 80% of their diet to start, and we'll probably get 80% of our results from that approach. So yeah, I kind of use that 80-20 rule, and then after we've seen good changes or significant improvements, and then want to keep improving, then we'll talk about other things. Or if we're not getting good results, then we'll roll up our sleeves, play a little bit more detective, and dive into other areas that can be sources of inflammation.
Yeah, it's funny. There's a movie called The Naked Gun, and one of my favorite quotes ever is, a guy in the movie was, I don't know, in an accident and all that, and they said, oh, he has a 50-50 chance of living, and the wife was happy, and then they said, but there's only a 10% chance of that. Then she started crying, just to make a joke about the 80-20 rule.
Yeah.
All right, so the main tool you're using is diet, changing the diet. So, let's focus in on that a little bit. What kind of changes do you see people need to make that, are beneficial for them, that alleviate Parkinson's and other kinds of conditions they have?
Yeah. So, and even before that, diet's a huge one, but even before that, and for people listening, I really want to emphasize this, that even more so than diet, if we could maybe even just take a step back, more than that, it comes down to mindset and the psychology of it. And what I mean by that is that you can tell people the best things to do and the worst things to not do, but it's very hard to change behavior. And so the one thing I would encourage people if they're listening, if they really want to make a change, you have to tap into an emotional reason first. First, establishing why it's even important to them that they're talking to me. So, for instance, like this gal with Parkinson's, I'll go through and I'll first ask her, why do you want to get rid of your Parkinson's? And then maybe she'll say, oh, well, I can't move my hands as well, I can't walk as well, I can't talk as well. I'm like, okay, well, and why is it important to you to improve that? And well, I want to be able to move more, I want to be able to be more active, I want to be able to, communicate better. Okay, well, why is that important to you? And usually I'll go through about 7, it's like the phrase, the 7 levels of why, until with her, I finally realized that for her, she wasn't able to go to church anymore. She wasn't able to go to her granddaughter's wedding. She wasn't able to sing in church anymore. And she was completely feeling isolated because all she could do was basically get up in the morning and go and lay down on the sofa. And that was the extent of her day. So for her, it wasn't that she wanted to get rid of her Parkinson's. It wasn't that she wanted to have better mobility. It really was that she wanted love and belonging. And that was the core emotion. So once I tapped into that core emotion, then I was able to more or less repeat that back to her. Because when I would give suggestions about do this food or don't do that food, or I want you to get this sleep pattern, or I want you to do look through these chemicals in your shampoos or your conditioners or whatever it is, the thing that she may say is, oh yeah, but I really like that, or that's my favorite lotion, or this is my favorite food, and I'll say, so let me ask you this: what's more important to you, going to church every Sunday with your family and your loved ones and making those memories and making it to your granddaughter's anniversary of her wedding, or eating those foods? And so it's a huge tool to leverage against when somebody is going back to old habits. So even before I start with the nutrition, I have people do that exercise either independently or ideally with somebody, because when you do it with somebody and it's a little more guided, you can get a foundation and people will have a much higher chance of success when they've clearly articulated their goals with a strong overriding or foundational emotional, a core emotion. And usually by those core emotions, I usually look at something that has to be instinctual. So love and belonging and belonging to a tribe and feeling connected, that's fundamental to our process and to our happiness.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
And then, so once I have that clearly established, then and only then do I usually start diving into what they can do specifically from where they're at. As a general rule, the foods that cause inflammation are usually all the foods that most people already know: sugar, grain products, seed products, vegetable oil, dairy products, too much salt. So yeah, grains, sugar, seeds, seed oils, salt, processed foods. But the problem is that we're not honest with ourselves. And what I mean by that is I can't tell you how many times I've had people, they call me up frustrated and discouraged. And they've just hired me, they've just paid me all this money, and after the first weeks or so, they're not seeing any changes. And they're frustrated, understandably so, because they're expecting some great miracle, even though I try very hard to be very, very realistic with outcomes. And I can't tell you how many times I've said, okay, what I want you to tell me some things that you've been eating for the last week. And almost invariably, they'll come back and they'll say, I'll hear words such as just and only, meaning, oh, well, I went out to eat and I just had a couple bites of garlic bread, or I only had one piece of cake at the birthday. And then what happens is, as soon as I hear someone say just or only, I know that they know that they're doing something wrong. because just and only are minimizing words, and if they're not honest words. And whenever I hear someone say, "Oh yeah, well I had a salad and I had just a piece of cake for dessert," well, why didn't you say I just had a salad and had dessert? Why didn't you flip it around? So the very nature that people choose those words speaks volumes to our realization of our subconscious of trying to hide what we're actually doing. So it's the accountability of it. And on top of that, I'll see people say, "Oh, well, I just had one coffee today." Okay, so you had one coffee and maybe you had some creamer in it or some sugar from Starbucks. And then you went to work and let's say for breakfast, you just had one piece of toast, which displaced other healthier foods. And then maybe for lunch, you just had a sandwich, which displaced other healthier foods. And then for dinner, you only had a few bites of pizza that went with something else. And what happens is you may only be having, one coffee once a day, but how many other things are you doing throughout the rest of the day? Those would be the overall foods that I would talk about. And so what I do is I have people actually fill out a 1-week nutrition log. And it's amazing that exercise. Oftentimes, once people go through some of like our educational programs, act of having them do a nutritional log will often prompt them to look at it, self-reflect, and self-correct.
A couple questions on that. Any tweaks you found that make for more effective versus less effective logs? Like take a picture and write it down by hand versus typing it in, report it to someone else. I mean, what's the best way for people to do it?
The best way for people to do it is whatever works for them and going back to their emotional reason. Because some people listening to this right now may say, "Oh God, I don't want to write it down. I don't want to put it in my fitness. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that." And people right now are already probably balking at the idea, even though they know it'll be beneficial for them because they haven't established the clear emotional reason. And it's kind of like Viktor Frankl talks about man's search for meaning. He said suffering without meaning is despair. But if we have meaning, then we'll go through the suffering. And the very act of writing down and logging things, there's a certain amount of suffering that goes with that. It's not fun. For most people, it's not fun. It's not enjoyable. It feels like homework. And it's not fun. It's a form of mild suffering, so we oftentimes avoid it. But if we know that there's meaning to it, and that meaning goes back to the emotional reason of why we're even waking up in the morning, what do we have to live for, then the suffering is tolerable. It's like exercise. Exercise hurts, and it's suffering. But people do it every day because they have meaning to it, because they want to either look better, they want to get healthier, they have an activity or an event that they're competing for, so they're training. So they have some deeper meaning that they're looking for. If you all day long, if you walked around and you felt the same pain as you feel at your peak exercise, it'd be miserable. But when there's meaning attached to it, it's tolerable, and it's actually almost desirable for that. So again, the hack I would say is establish your why and keep digging until you have a strong emotional reason. And I'll know that I hit it with clients and patients. When they start crying, that's when I know that we've hit it, and then we can move on to the next thing. I don't go until I get someone to cry and be a jerk. I genuinely try to create the space to ask questions and to pause and to give people time, because they're so used to 5, 10, 15-minute office visits that most doctors never actually create a space of silence, of listening, and letting patients actually talk. I think research shows that the average doctor interrupts after about 30 seconds of a patient talking. And of a 15-minute office visit, I believe the average 15-minute office visit, only about 2 to 5 minutes is spent on the chief complaint, and mostly that's just asking about symptoms. So in a 15-minute office visit, how much can you really connect with somebody? Like I said, usually my first visits with somebody, if not face-to-face, it's usually over Skype, or my least favorite is over the phone. But I usually spend an hour on my first consults with people, and probably more than half of that, because usually I get their case beforehand and I get a research and do a deep dive before I even talk to them. So I already know all the sciencey stuff, or at least the vast majority of it. So when I get on the phone, I just need to clarify a few things. But then when I get on the phone with people, that's where we can really dive into why the heck it's even important for them. Because then when we get to the tough stuff, we have to roll up our sleeves about telling somebody, "Hey, do this nutrition log." And they say, "Well, I don't want to write it down." "Well, can you put it in your phone?" "Well, I don't want to put it on my phone." And you just keep hitting roadblocks. I can easily go back to that. And I would encourage people to do that themselves. And that's a brain hack. So that's my brain hack, and that's my tip that I would offer is establishing a clear why and a clear emotional reason. Maybe it's you want to be with your kids for a long time. Maybe you want to be able to run and play with them. You want to be around for your great grandkids. You want to be able to, be more intimate with your partner. I know libido is a big one for people. 70.7% of the population is either overweight or obese. I haven't met any one of those people that is happy about being overweight or obese. I mean, the majority of the society is overweight or obese, and I've yet to meet anyone of those people that loves being overweight or obese. So even though we know we want things to be different, we're still not able to.
All right, so you have people do a food log, and when do you review it with them, and what's that experience like when you review it with people?
Yeah, so what I'll do is usually I do a food log with people if they're not getting the results, and my sniffer kind of picks out that they're feeling frustrated and I'm not able to necessarily navigate the conversation successfully with them without them feeling more frustrated. So what I'll do is I'll offer that, and it's almost like a third party counselor, if you will, because it's not coming from me, it's not coming from them. Because when I start working with people, sometimes, and this is kind of rare, but sometimes some people, if they're not getting the results right away, they start to feel a little bit like it's a them versus me, and I'm almost the bad guy because I'm telling them to make all these changes. So by having them do the nutrition log, it's something that they're doing and they're writing themselves. And so it's really just an opportunity for me just to hold up the mirror and then asking them just to look and open their eyes. So I can just hold up the mirror for them, and oftentimes that's enough for them to look and take a deep reflection. And 9 times out of the 10, it self-corrects just by that exercise and me just creating that space to say, okay, send it to me. I know you're not getting the results you want. I know that you think you're doing great, and you probably are. Let's do a nutrition log for 1 week. Send it over to me, and then let's go over that together. And then as soon as they get it, usually I'll say, okay, so what do you see in here? What do you think you're doing well, and what do you think could improve? They'll go through it.
Quick question. What if you had a number of food logs where you've already gone through it with the person and identified, and there was like 2 different ones, a before and an after? And what if you took the names off the identifiers and you showed that to the people who are doing the food logs and you said, these are not your food logs, but I just want to show you some examples. I want you to evaluate these and tell me what you think, if this person's doing a good job or bad job, and if, and what happened with them. I don't know. It might be just interesting to get people in on that aspect of it and see, because then it's not them, and then they'll be evaluating someone else's. I don't know. It'd be interesting.
I think that's a great idea, and it certainly may work. I haven't done that specifically. When I've tried things similar to that in the past, what I've found is that when I'll share other people's stories, if it's not similar enough to their own story, people will oftentimes unconsciously actually, what I found is they'll actually use that in defense of their position. And they'll say, oh, well, gosh, see, this person's food log is way different than mine. So this, I'm doing way better than this person because I only drink 2 coffees a day versus they drinking 4 coffees a day. And what I found is sometimes when I share stories of other patients, if I'm not careful, I found that it's backfired. I think what you suggest is a good observation and suggestion, especially if we could get it to where it had a certain level of similarity, so that they were really identifying with it and could almost maybe see it as part of their own. And one thing I'll add to that is usually by the time I'm doing a nutrition log with somebody, we've already established a certain baseline foundational education with them, so they already know a wide breadth and depth of which foods are inflammatory and which foods are anti-inflammatory. So again, oftentimes once they get that mirror in front of them, they can go through and they can readily self-select and highlight. And then if not, I can go through and outline. And then if we need to do it again in a couple months to make sure if we need to course correct anymore, it's a great tool to look back and reflect on.
Is there a certain set of people that have to be super strict in order to get results, or for the most part, if people just are 80% good with their diet or dialed in, they'll get the results?
Yeah, great question. I would say it entirely depends on their goal. To answer your question at first, I'd say if people are 80 to 90% compliant, they're going to see some good improvements. For me, I have a goal to live to 150. So if someone wants to have a high quality, rewarding, fulfilled, active lifestyle until they're well past 100, then I kind of turn the question around. I say, well, how good do you think you should be? And oftentimes when people come to me, I'm their last hope, and they've tried everything. So usually when they come to me, they're pretty bad. So which actually is good from the standpoint that we usually get to see results quicker. It's like the more sick that somebody is, the more obvious the results and the faster the results, versus if someone came to me and they were an elite athlete in their mid to late 20s, and they're already at the 94 percentile of their peak performance window, of their VO2 max or whatever measurement you're using, I'm what, maybe going to help them squeak out another 1 or 2%, which to them, might be noticeable. But if you're talking about like Olympic athletes or high performance people, it's going to be a lot harder to see those changes. But if you're talking about somebody that's, 60 or 70, they're overweight, they have low energy, they're on 3 to 4 meds, you're going to see results pretty quickly. And I think one of the biggest things that I see, if you look at all those nutrition logs, I think the biggest thing that I see is things slip into their nutrition logs and into their day that they don't even realize. It's those hidden things that are in either sauces or seasonings, or they go out to a restaurant and they don't realize what cooking oil that the chef is using, or a whole host of other things that they don't realize are slowly adding up. And, it's kind of like the example of if somebody came to me and they had lung cancer and they were a smoker, and they said, well, gosh, doc, how important is it for me to give up smoking? Do I have to give it up completely? And I'd be like, well, you have lung cancer and it was caused by the cigarettes. Like, yeah, you should give up smoking. Yeah, but doc, do I need to give it up completely, or can I just give it up like 80%? It's kind of a rhetorical question at that point. So I kind of use the same based on whatever someone's goal is. I turn the question back to them to empower them to make their own choice. I just lay out the facts and figures for them as best I can.
Okay. Any unusual or interesting outliers or things you've seen when you're evaluating people? Really memorable interactions or results that were interesting.
I think the thing that stands out in response to that question, which I think is a good question, is how much we think that we are in control, and how much in reality we are so driven by our instinctual desires and drives, and how much we almost consciously refuse to admit that or recognize it in ourselves. And I know a lot of people say that, we're so much more advanced and we're not wild animals and all that. And I get that. And yeah, I mean, obviously, you don't see chimpanzees or bonobos building skyscrapers or putting planes in the air. And I get that. But at the same time, look at places where there's a natural disaster and the power goes out and the infrastructure goes down, or the grid goes down for, let's say, 4 to 7 days, and look at what happens in those areas and how quickly pandemonium sets in. And all of a sudden, people that were very well civilized immediately revert back to their instinctual. There's looting, there's tribalism, there's violence. It immediately we click into survival. And the problem is that we're 24 to 48 hours away from that. And what I mean by that is, I'm not saying that somebody's going to go start looting, but because looting is a complete loss of your reasonable control over your actions. And neurologically speaking, 99% of our actions and our processes is not of our volitional control. And arguably, even the 1% that is under our volitional control isn't even of our own free will. And to kind of illustrate just a real soft point without getting too deep of a dive into free will, I'm not saying someone's going and looting or robbing or using violence in a state of pandemonium or infrastructure collapse, but rather when somebody comes home from work and they're hungry and they didn't prep ahead for dinner and they're tired and they're 40 pounds overweight and they have their 3 or 4 medications that they're on and they have a lot of fatigue and they know they're unhealthy, and yet they still knowingly then in that moment, they knowingly reach for something that's unhealthy for them because it's either easy, it either makes them feel temporarily good because they had a rough day, or they look at it as a reward. And so they eat something to satisfy an emotional need that is driven by an instinctual drive. Because if it wasn't instinctual, and if it wasn't an underlying instinctual drive that was prompting that action, then our frontal lobe and our reason would set in and say, gosh, you know what? I'm, X amount of pounds overweight. I'm on these medications. I don't want to keep going downhill. I know that food or beverage X is not healthy for me. And I know that food Y or beverage is better for me. So I'm going to make the conscious, rational, civil decision to choose those foods. But yet 70% of the population, actually, I'd even say more than that, doesn't. I mean, I'll fully admit that I've certainly done the things and eaten things or drank things in my life that I knew were not healthy for me, but yet I did it anyways, and I'm sure I'll probably will in the future. So I just offer that to say that I think we underemphasize the impact of our subconscious and our instinctual drives, and we tend to overemphasize how much we think we're in control. And it's like driving a car blindfolded, thinking that you know where every curve is. It's borderline madness. And I'd say that just look at the health stats. I mean, life expectancy just dropped for the last 2 or 3 years in a row. We've gone from 3% of our GDP on healthcare to now we're at 17, 18% of our GDP goes to healthcare. I believe that healthcare very well is going to be the next bubble because of how much it's propped up, and the free market is being so well pushed out of healthcare, and it's being so propped up that eventually there is going to be, I think, a healthcare bubble. But yeah, so to answer your question, I think it's underemphasizing the instinctual, and it's overemphasizing or this falsity that we think that we're in control when in reality we're not. So we have to set up systems, processes for us to win.
Well, very good. Well, we've gone long. We're kind of at the end now. But not everyone can see you, but of the people that can, what area can they come from, or can anyone in the country see you, and how do people get in contact to find out more and work with you?
Yeah. So I work all over the world. So I've had people from Australia, from Canada, Japan, all over. So given the technology today, it can be essentially anywhere. Typically what happens is someone reaches out to my assistant, and my assistant goes through a brief vetting process. And then usually we get on my schedule, which, if I have a cancellation or if I have a change or something, it can be within a month. If not, usually it's a month or two out, or maybe longer. And then I'll go through, and if I think I can help that person, great. We'll get working together. And if not, then I'll try to point them in a good direction. If people really want to come and see someone in person, they can come to any one of our clinics located in Southern Oregon, or they can certainly go to our website, drthadgala.com, for free resources and more information there as well.
That's great. Well, Dr. Thad, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, and thank you for your time.
Yeah, I hope this was helpful for people. Glad to help out. Hopefully people got some value out of it and gave some people some action steps and some things to think about to help hopefully improve their health and the health of others as well.
You're listening to the Future Tech Health Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Until I reached age 40, I never realized the obvious, that we all have medical issues, or we at least have a family member or close relation that has, or will have them in the future. Medicine and biological systems are the final frontier. Until we've conquered death, figured out how life began, cured cancer, and understood our purpose in the universe, there's a heck of a lot to talk about when it comes to our health. Future Tech Health means I'll be covering futuristic topics that are actually already in clinical trials, or even starting to appear on shelves or by prescription, or available for your own use. We dive deep into stem cells, CRISPR-Cas9, the science of sleep, epigenetics, medical testing, cancer, ketogenic diets, stem cells, aging, regenerative medicine, and more. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a serious medical problem. Remember, however, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and share it with friends. Thank you.